honored watch is Longines. Longines watches have won 10 World's Fair grand prizes, 28 gold medals, and more honors for accuracy than any other timepiece. Longines, the world's most honored watch, is made and guaranteed by the Longines Whitnall Watch Company.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnall Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnall, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening. This is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Mr. William Bradford Huey, editor of the American Mercury, and Mr. Donald I. Rogers, an editor of the New York Herald Tribune. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable John F. Kennedy, United States Representative from Massachusetts. The opinions expressed are necessarily those of the speakers.
Congressman Kennedy, you've been elected to Congress for 3 terms now as a young Democrat from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Tonight, sir, as a Yankee and as a New Englander, we'd like to hear some of your opinions on the outcome of the New Hampshire primaries. Do you see any particular significance in the vote in New Hampshire?
Yes, I think, of course, Mr. Rogers, the fact that General Eisenhower won by such a substantial margin, the fact that he won all of the delegates, it indicates, at least in the New England area, he has a substantial strength. The fact that Mr. Kefauver was able to beat Mr. Truman and receive all the delegates himself, I think really was a surprise. I don't think anyone really figured that he would ever do as well, even Mr. Kefauver.
Do you feel that portends anything for the vote in the rest of the country?
Well, I think in the Democratic column it indicates that Mr. Kefauver will have to be reckoned with, and it must cause some concern to Mr. Truman if he is interested in running again.
Mr. Kennedy, where do you stand, sir? Our audience knows you as a vigorous young man who's a son of a distinguished father. Now, where do you stand politically? You're a Democrat. Are you a conservative or a liberal Democrat? Are you a New Dealer? How do you define your own position in democratic politics?
Well, I define myself as a Democrat who supports the policies of the administration in cases of social legislation in quite substantially, though I have disagreed with them in some other particulars.
You've not supported the administration's budget, have you?
No, I haven't. I've tried, of course, a great many others, Senator Douglas and others who have supported much of the social policy, have tried to affect some economies. I don't think that there should be any contrast or clash there. I've supported more or less a middle line in the Democratic Party.
Our audience, of course, is particularly interested in your views because it's been mentioned that you are a possible or probable candidate for the United States Senate against Senator Lodge. Have you decided whether or not you're going to oppose Senator Lodge this year?
Well, Mr. Huey, I plan to announce my plans about what I thought I might do about the end of April. At that time, I thought I'd make them definite, but I'm certainly considering it very strongly.
Now, you generally have supported the administration. What parts of the administration program have you not supported, sir?
In the last year, I supported a cut for the European assistance of $300 million, which went finally through. In addition, I supported other cuts for foreign aid. I supported cuts to the domestic budget. I have differed from them in various other particulars.
Your father, of course, has been widely known as a critic of foreign spending. Do you share your father's views on foreign spending?
Yes, on foreign spending, though I think there is some difference between us on the amount of commitments that he would be willing to accept abroad and that I would be willing to accept abroad. He's in favor of a more national policy, perhaps withdrawing to the North American continent and the South American continent. I feel that it's important that we maintain strength in Western Europe and in Asia to prevent the communists from seizing control of those areas. We differ to that extent, though.
You are on the record, though, as favoring foreign assistance in certain areas, aren't you?
That's right, in a reasonable capacity, but not to the extent that we have been doing it in the last year. I think we went overboard, and we're not meeting the cooperation we should, particularly in Western Europe, where we've spent an awful lot of money and really haven't found an awful lot of strength as a result of it.
Do you feel we went overboard in Asia in foreign assistance?
The reverse, I think, is obvious, and I think we're paying the price in that area. Today, I think we concentrate too much on Western Europe. And if the communist strength was in both areas, both Western Europe and Asia, and we didn't meet it in both areas, well, now we've lost China and we're fighting a tough war in Korea.
What do you find to be the most critical area in Asia? You just recently returned from a trip.
Yes, I think Southeast Asia is the critical area. It offers a much greater opportunity for advancement for the communists than does South Korea. It's rich strategically, it's rich in natural resources, the rubber and tin of Malaya, the oil of Indonesia. It has manpower. Lenin once said that if the communists could secure control of Russia, China, and India, that the balance of power would begin to shift in her direction. And I think that they are making substantial progress.
There's danger there.
It certainly is, and offers great opportunities to the communists, much greater than Western Europe now.
In our worldwide battle, then, effort to contain communism, it's your view that we should be most gravely concerned about Southeast Asia at this moment.
Yes, I think we have, in our attempts to contain the expansion of communism, we have to be concerned about the struggle on the whole periphery. But I do think Southeast Asia is particularly dangerous now because the communists have made great progress. They have 500,000 guerrillas fighting in the jungles of Southeast Asia, and it's such an obviously richer target than South Korea is that it seems to me they're going to shift their weight from South Korea eventually to Southeast Asia.
You don't feel the French can contain them in French Indochina, for instance?
Well, they fought a long war. The French have suffered heavy casualties, nearly 30,000 in that war, and over 1,000 French officers killed. And though I think that at the present rate they're losing in the long run, unless the balance shifts in other places in the favor of the West, I would think that the French eventually would lose there, regardless of how strong a fight they may be putting up now.
Now, to particularize, Mr. Kennedy, I'm sure that our audience would like your views on this. Do you think that we should support the French in Indochina during 1952?
I think that we should have insisted 4 or 5 years ago that the French get out of French Indochina and permit a free native government to set up as we did in Indonesia in the case of the Dutch. But however, 1952, we have no alternative but to support the French because the alternative to the French would be the communists. Nevertheless, I do think that we must persuade the French to agree to get out at a certain date in order to get the support of the natives away from the communists. As the natives probably would prefer the communists to the French because they want the French out of there, we have to offer the natives a third alternative, self-government of their own, free of the French or the communists. And if the French would be willing to do that...
As a long-range objective, you think that we have to foresee and to even advocate that the French leave the area?
Well, we have to get a definite date because otherwise you can't win the support of the natives, and if you can't win the support of the natives away from the communists, you can never win out there.
Well, I gather from all this, Congressman, that you are critical of the administration's position in Asia. I call it position rather than policy because we seem to lack a policy.
Well, I'm certainly critical about what's happened there. Of course, a lot of it was just through general ignorance by all of us. We didn't know much about Asia. The communists drove in there once China was lost, and we made an awful lot of mistakes there. We took a great step towards losing all of Southeast Asia, and therefore we've made a lot of errors, and it's been, though no one's had any monopoly on mistakes in Asia, I think it's just been a general ignorance by the whole country and by all of us, and I think the administration has made many errors.
Mr. Kennedy, I believe you also visited the Middle East on your trip. Now, why is it that we Americans have so many enemies in the Middle East today?
Well, I think that there's two reasons. In the first place, all of these countries, stretching from French North Africa to the South China Sea, French Indochina, all of these countries have been or still are under the domination of Western powers, the so-called white powers. And there, therefore, is a heritage of animosity and hatred directed against the West, and as we are the strongest of the Western powers, we fall heir to a great deal of that. Secondly, these people live on a marginal level. Their standard of living is very low. Most of them are illiterate. They have this past history of Western exploitation. The communists, or at least the Russians, have not had a comparable colonial experience in this area. They move among the people and say, how could you be worse off than you now are? Come with us and you might be better off. It's compounded by the fact that in some of these countries they have native oligarchies who are corrupt and are not concerned about the welfare of the people. All these things compound in these difficult days make for a fertile field for communist infiltration and weakness for the West.
Well, now, what can we do, sir, to retrieve the situation?
Well, I think that the odds are against us in Southeast Asia. We might as well recognize it. But nevertheless,
Write
there
it
are
off?
some things that we can... No, I wouldn't write it off because I don't think we can afford to do it. But I think that, in the first place, I don't see any point in giving these governments large sums of money. But I would, because a lot of it would be wasted, but I would, and we haven't got it anymore, but I would give them technical assistance. We have done that in India. We sent out people from the Department of Agriculture who showed them how to increase their food productivity, which is their great shortage. And it's really, we haven't spent much money last year in technical assistance for India. We spent about $300,000. And for Western Europe, we're going to spend $6.5 billion, at least in the budget, about $6 billion.
That would be a lot less expensive than the program we're undertaking right now in Western Europe, wouldn't it?
It certainly would, but nevertheless, I think we have to continue our efforts in Western Europe. At least I'd have a sense of proportion on it. In addition, I would send the best Americans we can get out there. Our propaganda has been quite ineffective. Voice of America, at least in Southeast Asia, really doesn't measure up, doesn't do the job.
Yeah.
And I would support the natives in those areas and their aspirations, even if they don't always do what we want them to do. I would support the free countries of India, Asia, India, Ceylon, Indonesia, Burma. I would support the native aspirations in countries like Iran, even if it happens to be
Support
against
their
the
governments,
interests of
you
the
mean.
West. That's right. And their attempts and liberal groups, and even if they happen to be working against the Western powers with which we're closely allied. I think we have to support the natives in their attempts to be independent, or otherwise that those areas will be seized by the communists. And I think when the balance of power begins to shift in rearmament in our direction in 53 and 54, that our chances of success will be better. People will feel more secure going our way.
Is it fair to say then, sir, in conclusion, that domestically you now stand for some economy in 1952?
I certainly do. I think it'll be fatal. It's no use rearming if we're going to be destroyed by inflation.
Right. And for foreign policy, you think that Southeast Asia is the most critical area and that we must support native governments with technical assistance. Thank you very much for being
Thank
with
you
us
very
tonight.
much. Thank you.
The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Mr. William Bradford Huey and Mr. Donald I. Rogers. Our distinguished guest was the Honorable John F. Kennedy, United States Representative from Massachusetts.